Welcome back to the Live Zone Primetime on this Monday night. Tony P., Father's Day may be right around the corner, but tonight we are talking about motherhood. And you see the book cover right there, because behind White Picket Fences is the new novel by best-selling author Christine Gunderson. It's a page-turning thriller that explores what happens when three moms dare to step off the hamster wheel of modern parenting. And that is just the beginning. So for more on the book, motherhood, and why the topic hits close to home, Christine joins us now live on the Live Zone Primetime. Christine, thanks so much for joining us here tonight. I know not only are you local here to the DMV, but you also occupied the same chair that Tony and I do. You are a former news reporter and anchor as well. So welcome back to the world of TV news.
And streaming, whatever we call this stuff now.
Exactly. It's a whole different ballgame these days.
Good to be back on camera with you. Old anchors never die. They just get bigger hair.
I love that. I'm trying to keep as much of mine as I possibly can.
So am I.
All right. So we mentioned the hamster wheel, and that's what I want to start off with, because the idea of the hamster wheel of modern motherhood, was there a specific moment in your life that kind of sparked the idea for not only this story, but that phrase in and of itself, because it's so evocative?
I think that I had the same moment a lot of parents have had, mothers and fathers, which is sitting at one of your child's sporting events and secretly sort of hoping they might lose so that they don't have to play the next game in the tournament and you can all go home. And I think we're all sort of living in a unique parenting moment right now where we are inundated with travel sports, we are inundated with activities at school, we are inundated with things that we are expected to run around and do with our kids. And if our kids are not in a million activities, we feel like we're not being good parents. And it's exhausting for us, it's exhausting for our kids. And I sort of asked the question, what would happen if we just said no to all that? And what if moms did a sort of experiment where they dropped out of everything for 1 year? Would they be happier? Would their kids be happier? And in the process, they discover some sort of unsavory and interesting things going on in their suburban Northern Virginia neighborhood.
One of the largest things that I hear on social media, and my family, my mother as well, is emotional labor of motherhood. A lot of the things that do not get noticed, in the world that is around us, right? What does that emotional labor look like in motherhood, and what are some of the things that people may ignore about motherhood or not know what goes into it?
I think it's the 10,000 things that you're expected to keep track of. None of them seem important in and of themselves, but when you put them all together, it's exactly what you mentioned. It's the emotional weight. It's remembering to get the birthday present. It's making the orthodontist appointment. It's figuring out the carpools. It's making the pediatrician appointments. It's all of those 1,001 small things that are vitally important because we're talking about our kids here. But taken all together, they can be really overwhelming and really exhausting.
Imagine.
So the book kind of asks about the idea of like the simpler times that many parents romanticize. Did it ever really exist? And kind of like, what was your research into this, and kind of what because this book specifically kind of delves into the 1960s, what that era was like, especially when it came to parenting.
I think that all of us who grew up in the era before cell phones, before social media, playing outside until the streetlights came on and then you go home for dinner, I think we all remember sort of a simpler time. And I think the 1950s, the 1960s are sort of embodied by shows like Leave It to Beaver. And it looks like things were better, things were simpler. It was an easier time to be a kid, it was an easier time to be a parent. But as I did research and I sort of dug into that era and I interviewed a lot of women who were young women and working mothers and mothers during that time, I realized that things were very different for women back then. You couldn't get a checking account, you couldn't get credit, you couldn't rent an apartment without a man to co-sign loans. So it was very different for women. And I wanted to look at the expectations that people had for women then and the expectations that we have today. And some things have gotten a whole lot better, and some things haven't changed that much. And that's one of the things that I examined in the book. Motherhood in the past, motherhood in the present, and sort of how it's changed and how it stayed the same.
Do you feel that as we start to see some of the gender roles changing and becoming more modern, we're seeing more fathers getting involved, balancing work, the home, having two parents working, having to kind of juggle it 50-50. Do you sense that that's going to change the nature of motherhood, or do you still think some of the foundational items will exist?
I think that as long as when your child gets sick at school and they call the mom instead of the dad, moms are always going to feel that the burden is all pretty much
the emotional labor of that,
yes, but things are getting better, obviously.
Yeah. So, female friendship is also really important to this story between the three main characters. Why was it as important as it was to you to make that a central aspect of the book as well? Because motherhood is not a solo sport.
Exactly. And I think that one of the things we see is, it's harder to get to know our neighbors. Everyone is working. Everyone is running around to these activities. We're spending less time at home. We're spending less time in our backyards. We're spending less time in our neighborhoods. We're not forming the communities and the relationships with the people around us that we once did. And it's an examination of, if we slow down, if we remove some of the things that we don't need to be doing, will that create more of a sense of community? Will that allow us to know our neighbors? Will that bring us closer to the people around us and ultimately make our kids happier and make parents happier? And I think the answer to that question is yes, but I explore that in the book, and I'll let readers decide for themselves.
We're starting to see with my generation, Gen Z, and even some Gen Alphas, starting to kind of protest against technology. Dating apps are going down, more in-person activity is happening. In your interviews and research, did you see the parent generation, well, like Gen X, even some boomers, start to have that type of resistance? Or maybe, hey, we're a little bit too far with technology, let's try to put the pause on this?
I think that, being Gen X myself, and I'm raising Gen Z kids, I really see the impact that social media has on younger kids. And I personally feel very grateful that I didn't have Snapchat going up. I didn't have Instagram going up. I didn't know what other people were doing because we didn't have social media. And I think that for those of us who've sort of experienced life with social media and without social media, a lot of us feel like in a lot of ways it was better without it. And I think it makes parenting harder, and I think it makes life for kids a lot harder in a lot of ways too.
I'm actually, I'm fortunate. So I have a 5-month-old at home. It's our first. And my wife and I have really felt, social media has been so great in kind of letting us know we're not the only ones going through some very, what seemed like, oh, this is only us. And yet social media is full of videos of parents going through the exact same thing. So there are real benefits to it, but there are also real drawbacks when it comes to sort of this comparison sake, that a lot of people do, which, as we all know, comparison is the thief of joy. So, I can see both the pros and cons of this, but I also really like there's kind of this push to get back to the idea of like a 90s childhood.
Yeah,
there's
that's
a
a
real
biggie.
push to get back to sort of the analog life that a lot of my generation, I'm an elderly millennial, grew up with, which was, physical media and being allowed to be bored.
That's huge. They've done a lot of studies on creativity. They've done a lot of studies of kids who were allowed to be bored, and that goes back to having all of these activities, right? If you're constantly running around, if you're constantly scheduled, if you're going from chess club to Lego robotics to travel baseball, you don't really have time just to sit in the backyard and take a radio apart and figure out how it works and put it back together again. And I think that's something that millennials and Gen X and a lot of us who came from another era did have time to do. And I think it takes a deliberate effort to sort of say, we're going to say no to some things. We're going to block off some time to do nothing and be bored. And that's kind of a retro concept, but it's a concept that a lot of people are celebrating, as you pointed out.
None of this.
Yeah. But Christine, speaking of boredom, it sounds like you never had a free minute between not only your career and your kids and the travel sports and stuff like that, but you managed to write your first book while you were waiting in line, dropping off your kids and at those sort of travel things. Was this, and this is a two-part question. One, was it like sort of therapeutic to write for you? And two, did your family kind of read your books and then kind of like look at you a little sideways, like what was going on there in your head at the same time?
Yeah, I did. I wrote these books during football practice, swim team, drama practice, crew, because I think if you're a mom who writes, you feel selfish taking the time for yourself, so you make time for it in the nooks and crannies of your mom life, and that's sort of what I did. But I did it because it was therapeutic. It was, it was helpful to write about these things as I was going through them. And I really encourage moms who don't have time for themselves to make just a little bit of time for themselves. If they have some kind of creative thing that they love to do, you deserve to do creative things too, and to carve out that time wherever you can find it, because it is important.
As we look to the future and, talking about balance of motherhood and life and career, how can men who read this book may be able to look inward and say, how can I be a better partner? What are some of the ways that men as partners in the future can start to allow that balance to actually happen and not have mothers be so emotionally worn out?
That is such a great question. I would say the first answer would be laundry, and the second answer would be unloading the dishwasher, and the third
Those are
answer
easy.
would be making
Those are
dinner,
easy.
and the fourth
Easy.
answer would be going to the grocery store.
Okay, that's a little harder now. but
Yeah.
let's. I think it's an interesting point, because I think we're seeing with Gen Z, there's a kind of a push and pull. There's some that are starting to embrace, and I think in a good way, a new version of masculinity and being a present parent, and others there's kind of a pullback still. So it's nice to know this and hear this.
I think that's, having a 5-month-old, I think, our kids are always watching us. They are always watching us, and they are learning from us when we are being good role models, and they are learning from us when we are not being good role models. And I think the best thing we can do, to your point, is just to model to our kids the future that we would like to see them living. And, the best way that we can do that is just to be the best parents that we can.
Now, my final question has to do with the kind of writing process for you. So as a broadcaster, as an author, how did your broadcasting career inform how you wrote this book, your strategy, your research structure, all of that, as you've written these, best-selling books now?
And I have a little bit of a,
Yes.
like on that same note, we were taught, it was drilled into us to write at like a 5th grade level. So then how do you kind of
That's true.
improve upon, and I'm so guilty of
You
this
meant
in
this a lot,
all
yeah.
aspects of my life. So then how do you kind of then relearn to write for adults like Tony?
I feel like everything I learned about writing, I learned in a newsroom. I had a producer who, took that red pen and she was chopping out every single extra word. And I do feel that being a journalist in a newsroom, whether it be print or broadcast, it teaches you how to write. I have an incredible respect for deadlines, which I'm sure you guys do.
Oh, yeah.
I just turned in my 3rd book this morning. That book was on time. I've never been late.
Wow, congratulations.
Hey, nice.
Thank you. But I do feel that the lessons that you all know very well, the lessons that you learn writing every single day in a newsroom, that applies, whether you're writing novels, whether you're writing news copy. I loved my time working in a newsroom, and I feel like it's great training for all kinds of things, including going on and writing books.
And finally, in that research process, kind of a 2-part here, what did you learn the most about modern motherhood? And what did you learn about your own path with motherhood as well by doing this research and trying to figure out 60s era versus present versus modern era?
I think it comes back to finding your people. I think that it has never been easy to be a mom. It's never been easy to be a kid. And I think that the one thing that always gets us through in any era is having a group of people who have our back, who are walking through the same thing at the same time. It's to your point about the parenting groups when you have questions about your 5-month-old. I think it's finding a community of people who you can be honest with, who you can be real with about the struggles, who are going to walk through it with you. And I think that applies whether we're doing this in 1965 or whether we're doing it in 2026. I think that rule stays the same.
All right. Christine Gunderson, if people want to get a copy of the book, how can they do that? Or if they want to follow you so that they know when that 3rd book drops.
Right.
They can follow me on Instagram at @GunderChristine, or they can buy the book wherever books are sold.
All right, Christine Gunderson, behind White Picket Fences.
Fantastic work. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Congratulations, and thanks for spending some time with us here on the Live Zone Primetime.
Thank you. It was so much fun.
All right, have a great night. Tony P., let's take a live look